When people ask me if I have ever witnessed a moment where greed transformed into generosity, where a heart hardened by money suddenly melted in the warmth of humanity, I always think of one man, a money lender named Raghav. And every time I tell this story, I remind people that what we possess is never as important as what we become. I grew up in a small village, the kind that looked peaceful from the outside but carried stories in every corner. From the morning cries of hawkers to the evening smoke rising from wood stoves, everything felt like poetry. Yet beneath this sweetness, there were people struggling, families fighting silently against poverty. In the center of our marketplace stood a narrow wooden shop, its walls covered with old calendars and dusty shelves, where Raghav, the most feared money lender in the region, sat every day with his thick glasses, his ink-stained ledger, and a permanent frown on his face. People went to him only when they had no choice. He lent money, yes, but at high interest, and when the time of repayment came, he became a storm, merciless, loud, and unmovable. For years, villagers whispered stories of how he seized land, took cattle, or publicly humiliated families who missed payments. But no matter how much people disliked him, they needed him. And he knew it. That I was just 18 when I first met him. My father had been unwell for months, and his medicines were expensive. We sold everything we could, our livestock, our wheat stores, even my mother's jewelry, but it wasn't enough. When we reached our last hope, my uncle whispered the name we all feared, Raghav. Even stepping into his shop felt like stepping into a trap. The old man looked at us with no emotion, flipping through pages as if we were just numbers. He listened to our problem, nodded coldly, and wrote a loan amount that would take years to pay back. My father didn't want to sign. But I could see the pain in his eyes, the fear of leaving us helpless, so he placed his trembling signature on the paper. What followed were months of struggle. My brother and I worked in the fields from sunrise to sunset. My mother stitched clothes for the neighbors. But still, we barely managed to pay the interest, let alone the principal amount. And every time we visited his shop, the same cold eyes stared at us, reminding us that we owed him more every day. But this story isn't about my family. It's about the day everything changed for him, and for our entire village. It began with a boy named Arjun. He was 14, thin, quiet, and carried the weight of a family on his shoulders. His father had died suddenly, and his mother worked as a maid, barely earning enough to feed him and his younger sister. Their small hut leaked during the rains, and their clothes were often torn at the edges. But despite all this, Arjun had a spark in him, a determination that made him wake up at dawn to polish shoes, deliver newspapers, and study under a street light because their house had no electricity. One afternoon, as he was rushing through the market to deliver newspapers, he accidentally collided with Raghav, causing the old man's ledger to fall in the mud. The villagers froze. Some shook their heads in pity. Others stepped back, waiting for the explosion. They all knew how Raghav reacted to disrespect, intentional or not. The money lender's face turned red as he wiped mud off his prized ledger. He shouted, "Do you even know what this book means? Years of hard work. You useless boy." Arjun bowed his head and apologized again and again, but Raghav continued yelling, attracting a crowd. The boy's hands shook. Tears formed, but he didn't let them fall. He stood firm, knowing he couldn't afford to anger the man who controlled half the village. As punishment, Raghav made him clean the entire shop and polish his shoes for the whole week. Arjun worked without complaining, wiping the dusty shelves, arranging the old files, and sweeping the floor. Although people felt it was unjust, no one dared to say anything. That was how power worked in our village. But what happened next surprised everyone. One evening, while cleaning, Arjun found something behind one of the wooden shelves, a small, old metal box, rusted at the edges. Without opening it, he took it to Raghav. "Sir," he said softly, "I found this behind the shelf while cleaning." The moment Raghav saw the box, his breath caught. He snatched it, his hands trembling in a way no one had ever seen. For a moment, all his anger disappeared, replaced by a strange sadness. This wasn't an ordinary box. It held the last thing he had from his late wife, her bangles, her letters, and a picture of them together. The box had been lost for years, and he had assumed it was misplaced during a renovation. No one knew how much he regretted the harsh life he lived. He had once been a soft-hearted man, but after losing her, he drowned himself in business, believing money was the only thing he could control. For the first time in years, his voice trembled. "Where did you find it?" "Behind the shelf, sir," Arjun said. "I thought it might be important." Raghav stared at the boy, really stared, as if seeing him for the first time. Arjun's face shone with honesty. He could have stolen the jewelry and disappeared. No one would have known. But he didn't. That night, something changed in the old man's heart. The next day, he visited Arjun's home. People watched from their windows, confused and shocked. No one had ever seen him walk into a poor family's hut. Arjun's mother greeted him nervously, apologizing again for the ledger incident, worried her son had done something else wrong. But instead of anger, Raghav placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Your son has more honesty than most adults I know." He asked about their struggles, their expenses, their dreams. When Arjun hesitated to speak, his mother explained everything. How her son wanted to study, how he hid his torn books under the bed so his sister wouldn't worry, how he skipped meals to save money for school fees. After listening quietly, Raghav reached into his bag and took out some papers that he announced, "From today, all your debts, every rupee, are cleared." The mother gasped. Arjun's eyes widened, and, he continued, "I will sponsor Arjun's education until he completes college." The silence that followed was so heavy that even the breeze seemed to stop. No one could believe it, but this was just the beginning. The old man returned to his shop the next morning, sat at his desk, and looked around at the dusty files, the ledgers filled with names of people he had hurt, threatened, or scared. One by one, he pulled the files out and read through them. Some owed him money for their daughter's wedding. Some for medical bills. Some for repairing their roofs after storms. He remembered every face. Every tear. Every plea he had ignored. By evening, he made a decision that shook the village. He called everyone to the market square. People gathered anxiously, whispering, afraid of some new rule or harsh demand, but instead, the old man stood before them, cleared his throat, and said something no one expected: "I have been wrong." Gasps spread across the crowd. Children froze mid-run. Women stopped talking. The village had never heard these words from him. "I spent years collecting money but losing myself," he continued. "Today, I am forgiving all outstanding loans. Every single one. You owe me nothing." For a moment, there was utter silence. People looked at each other, unsure if they heard correctly. Then someone cried, then another. Soon the entire crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in tears, relief, prayers, and disbelief. People hugged one another, some fell to their knees, some rushed toward him with gratitude. But he simply raised his hand and said, "Don't thank me. Thank the boy who reminded me that honesty still exists." From that day, the village changed. The hard-working poor no longer feared losing their homes. Farmers no longer trembled when drought came. Women no longer hid their jewelry when passing his shop. Raghav didn't stop lending money. But he changed the way he did it. He reduced the interest to almost nothing. Sometimes he didn't charge at all. He started helping families set up small businesses, teaching them how to save, how to grow, how to stand on their own feet. And as for Arjun, he studied with a new fire inside him. Raghav paid for his books, clothes, fees, even his meals. He went from a kid polishing shoes to the first engineer the village ever produced. The day he returned after graduation, the entire village celebrated, and Raghav stood in the corner, wiping a tear he pretended didn't exist. Years later, when Raghav passed away peacefully in his sleep, the whole village walked behind his funeral pyre, not out of fear, but love. Arjun lit the fire, whispering, "Thank you for believing in me." Today, when people ask me why this story matters, I tell them it is because a man feared by hundreds became a man remembered by thousands. Because all it took was a small act of honesty from a poor boy to awaken a sleeping heart, and because at the end of the day, money can build a house, but only kindness can build a life.